So it's very funny that they're saying Putin is going to take, fake a military action. Well, in the meantime, I'm watching the news last night, and Ukraine is training civilians with cardboard rifles. And they are creating their own narrative as well. So nobody's innocent here.
Sure.
Except for the innocent people who are going to get hurt. I think about 50,000 or so people already died in this nonsense that's been going on since 2014 in the current rendition, because this goes back a couple hundred years.
Yeah, do you remember the storming of the Capitol where all those individuals are being killed? That was back in like 2014 or something like that.
That was 2013 to 2014. Okay. That was the Euromaidan events. And that was a fully Soros-funded color revolution event, just the same. So
I want to see if I can find the video of that, because it's crazy what happened with that.
And they killed 98 people that day, or 100 people that day. And the president of Ukraine had to flee the country because his life was in danger. And he was a coward. All the same.
Yep. I'm just thinking, right. That's exactly right. It's Ukraine itself is a very corrupt country, and in its own right. And, it was interesting. Jimmy Dore pointed out some stuff. I had this on the show quite a couple of weeks ago. I tried desperately to play it, but it was like a week or two before Rich left for Florida. We just didn't get time on it, or have enough time to get to it. He pointed out that we're funding like radical sort of identitarian groups. So it would be like fascist.
When you say we, like the United
States, the West is the West. Okay. The West is funding particularly the United States. In fact, I think specifically the United States, maybe with help with Mossad NATO. Or MI6.
NATO is.
Is it NATO?
NATO countries are, well, of course, the United States.
The United States is the head, right? Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big, heavy, absolutely.
Because you can see.
Go ahead. Sorry.
You can. Well, I just want to follow up on this. He showed multiple pictures of these militant groups in the Ukraine with the Nazi swastika on it, and obviously well armed, and very much in support of a sort of free Ukraine, but very much also with this sort of pernicious right form of identity politics being played out. We talk about the left form all the time because that's what's happening in our country, or in the country we reside in right now. But in Europe, this to me, I just kept thinking Brzezinski, because I'm like, this model has been done now for 40 years. Actually, more than that. This goes back to the 70s. So it would have been like almost 50 years of, yes, like Kissinger sort of came up with the general conceptual idea of limited warfare. But Brzezinski brought it to action insofar as like forming and arming militant groups, even going so far as to provide them with a specific ideology. We did that with the Mujahideen. Actually providing some of their own ideology, regurgitating or recapitulating in a different sort of context and framework ideas of Islam, which are way outside the context of Islam. And that's something I could do a whole deep dive into, and someday I will, because it is fascinating what we did, including printing some of the material in America and sending it to the Mujahideen in order to radicalize them even more. This is happening in the Ukraine. It's just happening under the sort of the auspiciousness, or sort of the cloak, if you will, the smoke and mirrors of identity politics, that they identify with being a Ukrainian, that it's sort of an identity movement of Ukraine. I have a Ukrainian friend I was speaking to you about the other night, and he talks about this, and I couldn't help but notice as I was regurgitating what he was saying to you, you were like, this sounds like propaganda. And I'm like, you know what? God, it really does. It like really, really does. And it just, it makes me wonder, because this fomenting conflict in the Ukraine is really nothing new. So why all of a sudden is this myopic focus on it now?
Well, for one thing, this isn't now. We're paying attention to it now. This didn't start last week or last month.
Right, exactly.
The current rendition of the events that we're experiencing or watching from afar have been happening since 2013, but this is the very current rendition. So this goes back a lot of centuries. if we have a couple of minutes, I'll give you a very short briefing on.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
And this is a completely outsider's view. If if I have no political involvement in any party, any country, or anything like that, and I'm always about the people because I always feel for the people, because we do nothing to deserve any of this. And everything that's done to us is brought onto us by armies and generals and or ruling parties, and we have no power over any of it. So that being said, say something like in the 800s, I think in sometime between late 800s to the year 1130 or something like that, there was only one Russia. And they were under Moskovskaya. And the center was Kiev, what we know now as Ukraine.
Ukraine, correct.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. And
so for 300 years, it was
almost
this
250 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah. So they are one country. And there's this very interesting map of Europe, sometime from 400 BC to now.
Is that the map you showed me earlier?
Yes.
Let me see if I can bring
ever-changing. But please turn the volume off on that. Okay. There's a very obnoxious music in the background. So sometime between 12th to 13th centuries, the union between this whole nation falls apart, because Europe was never one country, two countries. It's always small, tiny little city-states, or, the Roman Empire, of course, is huge. And then the Mongols come, there's a lot happening.
You had the Roman Empire, then you had sort of the recapitulation, the Roman Empire in the form of Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire. And then you had the Mongols coming, and these maybe represent
the Golden Horde.
The Golden Horde, exactly. And these three instances, obviously, we're talking about ancient history in the form of Roman history. In the form of the Holy Roman Empire, we're now to medieval history. And that was maybe at the closest. They tried to, in fact, imitate the Roman system as much as possible. In fact, many of the terms that were used in the court of Charlemagne and that were appropriated for that dynasty and the Holy Roman Empire were taken from the Roman tradition. However, then the Mongols come, and they're just unified under a very simple, basic system of warfare and of hegemonic dictatorship in the form of Genghis Khan. But then again, just like Alexander the Great, for 33 years, was able to unify, all of the Greek-speaking worlds with Persia and into the western edge of India. What happened right after he died is exactly as a parallel and analogy is what happened to Mongol, or what happened to Genghis Khan and his empire within about 2 generations. It was split up into various principalities and city-states and duchies and whatever you want to call them. That's what happened in Europe over and over and over again. And that's for the longest time. In fact, one of the famous battles, the Battle of Kalka River, was the one time in medieval Europe's history where the Russians, well, what we say is modern day Russia, was actually just principalities and kingships, got together and was able to form an army of over 100,000 individuals to go against this 20,000 army of the Mongols. And otherwise, they were fighting each other because there was no unified Russia. There was no unified idea of what a Russian state was. In fact, as my friend points out, my Ukrainian friend, Kiev, to your point, is to them the cultural center. He likens what's happening in the Ukraine. The reason why Russia is so belligerent in their actions against the Ukraine is because it's the cultural center beyond just it being the breadbasket of Europe.
Because that's the concept of Kievskaya. That's their origin story. So both Russia and
that's their
Ukraine,
cultural mythos. I see.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So they're going after, no, Kievskaya is us, completely forgetting they're basically the same people.
Right.
So I'll bring us to a little, closer to now, from let's leave 13th century behind. So sometime in the 1700s, that region, especially, in 1768, there's a war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire.
Hmm.
And at this time, Crimea or Kırım is a part of the Ottoman Empire. The important thing about Crimea is that it's a peninsula that's right in the middle of the Black Sea. And at the edge of it is a small city called Sevastopol, where the Russian and or the Turkish, at the time, the Turkish Navy was stationed there. And if you rule Sevastopol, you rule Black Sea.
There's a famous battle around that. Oh my God.
Of course.
Yeah.
So this is where this goes back to in its, last 2 centuries rendition.
And in more modern historical form. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah. So they have this war. And then in 1770, sometime around then, Russia wants to take over Crimea. And the Ottomans are like, okay, you know what? We're not going to let you take it because it's dangerous. We're going to allow, there's a treaty called Küçük Kaynarca, and Ottomans give Kırım, Crimea, its own sovereignty. And they become a pseudo-sovereign entity, sort of tied to Russia in one end and the Ottoman Empire on the other. So at the same time, this is happening in 1778, I think, the last Khan of Kırım, who's a Tatar, who's a Turk, all the way from Genghis Khan's time.
Yeah.
He's the last one, and his name is Şahingiray. And this man is kidnapped by the Russians and sent to exile. And in 1883, Russia breaks the treaty from the 1770s, and they just annex Crimea, take it to their own, because that's where you station your navy if you want to rule the Black Sea. So that's the story. So I'm just going to jump a whole bunch of years because it's irrelevant at this point. But in 1954, there is a president of the USSR. His name is Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev was from Crimea. And he turns around and gifts it to the Ukrainian people. It's a gift. Take it. I don't have anything to do with it. But he still kept the Russian Navy at Sevastopol. That was sort of like a loose agreement. So there's always these loose agreements, and these people speak the same language. They come from the same exact genesis. Therefore, they're not that far off from one another, but they cannot come together because there's always someone boiling the water in there. Just like the young movements that came about in the 1860s with the Garibaldi and the Mazzini. And they also had the young movement there, separating these people. There's always someone just pushing into that. You know what I mean?
No, it's actually the same. For analogy for people in modern times, it'd be the color revolutions in the 2010s and the early 2010s that happened in the Middle East.
Same exact idea.
And North Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1991, after the collapse of the USSR, and then you have all these new countries, well, not new, I shouldn't say that. All these countries fall out from USSR and they take their own sovereignty, such as Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. The importance of Kazakhstan here is that Russia also wants a piece of Kazakhstan right now. They want a piece so bad. And Tokayev, who's the
Why do
president,
they want that?
Because they're saying
mineral rights?
I don't know. They want a piece. They're constantly sending each other very strange, cryptic messages in their speeches. The president of Kazakhstan, his name is Tokayev. Tokayev keeps saying, hey, you can't take my land. It's mine. If you look at the map, Kazakhstan is no joke. It's an enormous country.
It's actually very important, too, for the Silk Road, which would lead to China, which is a new manufacturing base of the world. So China is a key player here, too. That's not being mentioned. But there's also something we have to look towards there is what relationship What sort of leverage does Russia gain, maybe potentially over certain aspects of China, at least in their ability to trade in the Middle East and then Eastern Europe?
And it's very important to look at the map as we're talking about these countries, because they are so close to one another. And it's important to understand their relation to places like exactly China. Where do they stand in relationship to one another? So anyway,
let me see if I can bring up the map here real quick.
In 1991, Ukraine has their first president, because that's the year that they, established their country as Ukraine away from USSR. And they have their first president and constitution, and they take over Crimea along with Ukraine. And that's a big problem. But that also makes them, for a very brief period of time, Russia's very important Black Sea fleet. So Russia says, hold on a minute, Ukraine, like, what are you doing? This is a huge fleet. We built it. Okay, you took off on your own from USSR, but you just can't take our fleet. That this is ours. So let's share it. So Ukraine agrees. And then within a year, by some very strange coincidence, a Ukrainian battleship, what a coincidence, enters the Russian port of Odessa. And of course, Russia and Ukraine go into the scuffle for a few months. There is, life loss, and it's not pretty. And this goes on for like 4 or 5 years. Sometime in 1990, 95, 96, I don't remember, Boris Yeltsin, the Russian president at the time, and Ukraine come to another agreement. Let's stop this fight. It's stupid. Let's continue sharing Sevastopol until the year 2017. So this is going to be a 20-year agreement moving forward. And then we'll see what happens. We'll recuperate our losses in 2017. We'll decide what will happen then. And then magically, a couple of years later, a Russian civilian airliner, the brand is Aeroflot. The plane is going to Tel Aviv, has about 80, 90 passengers, and it gets shot down by an S-200 missile. Russia says, hey, Ukraine, you shot our plane down, you killed our people, we have to go to war. Ukraine says, well, we didn't shoot anyone. It wasn't us. It was a Russian-made missile. So talk about fake military action. Nobody knows who did what. And that becomes a problem right then and there. So that
what year was that?
I think 2001.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just speaking from memory. I don't have any paper, nothing.
Sure, yeah. I just want to make sure I got my general timeline. Yep. Okay. Continue.
Yeah. So that agreement they came to in 96, 97 with Boris Yeltsin, of course, completely falls apart with the idea of sharing the Black Sea Fleet. If you look up Black Sea Fleet, it's very important. You can completely own the Black Sea with the Black Sea Fleet. It's an amazing navy. So fast forward a couple more years, there's something called the Orange Revolution that happens in 2004 or 5. And of course, that is fully funded by Soros, the Otpor color revolution. So what happened was there's a very Western-facing president called Yushchenko, and he's elected as president, and he wants to go into the EU. And he goes against this other presidential candidate who was, I think, the prime minister at the time, and he's Russia-facing, he's Russia-leaning, and his name is Yanukovych. And Russia said, as soon as the Western-leaning, the EU-leaning president gets elected, Russia turns off the valves to the natural gas pipeline.
Oh boy!
In 2005, and this is happening, I think, February or March of 2005. It's cold as fuck up there, and they turn off the natural gas. Can you imagine? And then, of
It
course,
happened in November 2004 to January 2005, like right
there
when.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so I was wrong a little bit.
And
Sorry about
immediate aftermath of the runoff vote from the 2004 Ukraine, like right after it, that happens.
Yeah. So in the middle of winter,
Wow.
Russia is like, all right, you don't elect our guy? Here you go. No gas for you. It's the soup Nazi situation. And then they had
Yeah.
to sit down. A new agreement had to be drawn for, everything. And in order for Ukraine to get their gas back on, they had to pay 100% more. So they doubled the price. I mean, this is like cruelty at a different level. And at this time, the person who's doing this is the owner of Gazprom. I forget his name, whatever. Then let's skip a little forward because I don't exactly remember what happened in between, but sometime.
I think
So,
real quick, if I may cut in real quick, what's fascinating, one, to your point, like 33% of Russians actually live in the Ukraine right now. Two, they share a common cultural heritage, whether they want to admit it or not. And they are the same type of people. They look the same. They eat the same foods. They speak much of the same languages or the subtypes of those languages. There's so much similar between these groups, and yet they're being artificially divided and have been artificially divided for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Hell, nearly a millennia, if you go back far enough to the 13th century. So it's like, I want to hear the rest of how we get to the main timeline. But when we get up to the main timeline, like, I guess the point to take away for the audience is this has been going on for a long time. Issues in the Crimea, and the Crimea is much like the Middle East insofar as it's made up of a whole bunch of different types of people that don't recognize, like Afghanis don't recognize themselves as being an Afghani. They're part of another tribe. They're part of another religion. They're part of another sect. They don't identify with that. It's the same with Iraqis in some semblance as well. It's artificially drawn lines, oftentimes from the British or from the winners of various wars for resources, whether it's minerals or oil or what have you. We talked about the Sykes-Picot Agreement before in regards to the Middle East. But when it comes to like the Crimea or these other areas that Sen is bringing up, these are contrived artificial boundaries that have a lot of different ethnic or religio-ethnic groups, or just other groups that identify with something completely different, maybe some sort of tribal heritage that extends back from centuries, if not millennia. Like my Ukrainian friend would say there's Cossacks, for example, which is sort of an indigenous tribe of like that area.
And there's
going
Tatars
back.
there.
Yes, Tatars, yes.
Tatars there. They're still there.
So all this is going on for so long. And then all of a sudden, in this sort of myopically designed fashion, we're focused on this one tiny thing. We're now, like, that's what's curious to me. It's like, how did we get to being so focused in America, in the West, on this now? Because it's been going on for God knows how long. I mean, you pointed out so many different instances. We just talked about the Orange Revolution in 97. You mentioned before that you had that agreement where they said, well, 20 years in 2017, we'll deal with Sevastopol then. And that only lasted for 4 years until this mystery missile happened. Yeah. I mean, sorry, but I can't help but just speak out loud in regards to all these anomalies.
So, you know how in these kinds of countries, there's always one side, and then one side wins and then the other side wins. Mm-hmm. And when I say these kind of countries, I mean the United States as well. The Democrat wins one term, Republican wins 2 terms, and it goes back, forth. It's a planned pendulum effect.
Yeah.
So we were in 2004-5, the Orange Revolution. So now we're fast forwarding a few years to 2013. Remember the Western leaning president was in power. So now in 2013, the Russian leaning president Yanukovych is in power. And then as soon as he walks in, he tears up a draft agreement that was going to allow Ukraine to be considered for the European Union. And of course, all hell breaks loose. Yeah. And now there's a new color revolution. And that's what happened in Euromaidan. And Euromaidan means Euro Square. And there's enormous civil unrest. 90-something, 100 people get killed for no apparent reason. the
I'm trying to find the video my friend shared to me because I was unaware of this until he shared it with me. And
president president flees the country like the coward that he is. It's terrible. So immediately, of course, a new Western-leaning president comes to power, and Russia goes, okay, well, change your plans. You killed people. You made our president run out. We're just going to go ahead and annex Crimea. And in 2014, they create out of that tiny peninsula the Republic of Crimea.
Who annexed it? I was looking up the video. I'm sorry. Russia annexed it. Annexed Crimea again. Okay.
Yeah, separated into two parts. Okay. There's the Republic of Crimea, which is 90% of it, and in the tip of it is Sevastopol, where they keep their Black Sea fleet. That there are 3 cities in Russia that are called federal cities that have their autonomous. They belong to the federal government. They don't belong to just the region. So the number 1 is, of course, Moscow. The number 2 is St. Petersburg. And now the number 3 is Sevastopol. And that can never be taken from Russia. So one day they might give back
everything but
Crimea,
that part.
Sevastopol, just like how Alaska is a part of the United States, but it's like nowhere near.
Right.
Same deal. You can take whatever you want from Crimea, but Sevastopol is now forever a part of Russia.
And that's for control of the Black Sea.
Yes. So in 2014, Ukraine, during the annexation, asks for, there's an organization called OSCE. OSCE is Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They begged for permanent observers to be sent to the Ukraine. And these people have been there, the permanent observers. I think there are 400 of them. They've been there since 2014. They're still there. Of course, different people take charge, they're constantly moving people around, but they're trying to figure out a way to stop this war from happening, because the people who live in the areas that's neighboring this whole place, they don't want this war. Nobody wants this war, because if this war happens, whatever happened in Syria when they opened the floodgates and they just kicked those poor people out of their own country into Turkey by the millions, 8 million people passed through Turkey. Can you imagine? Like now,
or what happened to Rwanda and to the Congo? Yeah, I mean, we can go on and on. Yeah.
So now they're going to open the floodgates from Ukraine by, completely taking these people out of their homes. God knows how many people are going to die for no apparent reason. About 5 million people are going to they're going to be homeless and stateless.
And there's a clean water issue already in the Crimea, if I remember correctly. There's a big issue with reservoirs in regards to clean water. Like that's one of the most basic resources, obviously, anyone would need. I found the video, and interestingly enough, so I was talking to my friend he's from the Ukraine, lives in Washington, D.C. now. We talked about this on August 24th, 2021. I had no idea about any of this. And now I'm going to share for everyone. This is what happens when I try to bring the video up now. See if I can bring this. This is what I get. I don't know where it went. It had been on there for years and years when I watched it. And now all of a sudden, with the fomenting of conflict, the video is unavailable. Obviously, it was very graphic. You could see individuals being shot to death as they were storming the Capitol. You could see the surrounding Russian military in the woods sort of sniping these individuals as they were trying to push forward. Just absolutely insane how they keep a people that actually have a shared common mythos, a shared genesis, divided and conquered. And it really has to do with maintaining key, not only resources, but key strategic military locations and power in regards to the Black Sea. And for people who aren't aware, controlling the sea is controlling everything. So much focus on the South China Sea, right? And making sure we keep Taiwan safe, and then making sure there isn't like this island hopping effect from Taiwan to Japan, because Japan's not allowed to build up their military because of an agreement we have with them post World War II. But what people don't realize is that regardless of the technology we have in regards to aviation, controlling the sea is still controlling the world. Whoever controls the sea, at least from a military strategic standpoint, controls the world. This is why, we think about the British. The sun never set on the British crown, or the sun never set on the British Empire at one point, especially when they controlled India. But that was being able to control the seas. We think about the Opium Wars, their ability to go into those ports and control trade. This is still controlling the sea is controlling the sea is controlling the world, at least from a purely military strategic standpoint. And that hasn't changed. The technology hasn't changed to the point where that has in any way, put it into a different strategic standpoint. So I think it's important to point out that Sevastopol for the Black Sea would be an unbelievably important strategic outpost for Russia. And then on top of that, the Ukraine, combine that with the cultural genesis of that whole area with the Ukraine, and it being the breadbasket of Europe and Russia, you can see why they would very much want to, I'll put in air quotes, annex the Ukraine, if you will. Well,
I'm watching the news constantly. So Ukraine is NATO aligned. They are not a part of the NATO organization, but they are NATO aligned. So if a war happens, what's going to end up happening? It's going to be a NATO against Russia war. And that's not going to look pretty.
And that's why you see so many politicians, whether it's PMs from various European nations or our president in the United States abiliside the House of Representatives, but the Senate and the Congress, talking about in lockstep, in unison, in agreement with taking some sort of action and trying to potentially foment that action by illegitimate statements that Bloomberg put out, Yeah.
So a couple of days ago, Boris Johnson declared that he's giving $2.5 billion credit to to bolster the Ukrainian Navy. And he also pledged thousands and thousands of ballistic missiles.
There you go.
In the meantime, Boris Johnson is meeting with Macron, the French president, over this whole situation, yet nobody's bringing in the Ukrainian president, Alexei Zelensky, into the mix, like, okay, maybe we should talk to you first, or to Putin. But in the meantime, Putin is at the Beijing Olympics posing with Xi Jinping, like, hey, look at me.
And talking about NATO, and talking about the belligerent actions of NATO.
Exactly. And the BRIC nations, or whatever it is they're doing. Right. Yeah, Brazil, and in the meantime, the Russian Foreign Secretary Lavrov, who's like a real hard ass, he's sending very mixed messages. He goes, I watched his news briefing the other day. He goes, yes, we are still piling weaponry against NATO countries. And he goes, no, we're not going to invade Ukraine. We're just doing some, we're just doing some exercises there. And then he goes, and if NATO keeps prodding us and prodding this situation, he says Europe is going to have a very, very hard winter with the Russian gas not flowing their way.
Oh, passive aggressive there a little bit.
Yeah. Well, to me, that sounds very aggressive.
Yeah, it's not very passive, but it's a different type of aggression. Yeah.
The newscaster asked him, well, sir, he goes, if Europe is not going to buy your gas, who's going to? Lavrov says, don't worry about that. We have buyers. You don't worry about that. You worry about your hard winter. So there's a lot going on, and
our key resources that will impact a lot of millions and millions and millions of people to be able to live their life in a basic way.
Yeah. That's really what's coming on. We'll shut off the valves, and he's saying it over and over.
What do you think the U.S.'s strategy here is? Is it this diversion? Is this just a red herring to look away from the Biden administration and its failures? Is this a way to get us to myopically focus on this instead of what's going on in the U.S. in regards to COVID policy I mean, it might be all of the above, but I'm just throwing out a couple of different scenarios as to why we do
I
some,
think
or
it's
the military
all of
industrial
the above.
complex and, you know, wanting to the limited war that I talked about with Kissinger, then Brzezinski, you know, and the idea of funding, arming militant
There
groups and
are
radical groups.
contracts. There are almost like blood contracts written between nations and companies like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Those are blood contracts, and they have to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Those missiles have to be sold. Those tanks have to be pledged. Those F-35s, F-16s have to be built and sold. Those are the rules. So someone's getting rich. Is there going to be a full-out war? I doubt it.
That's the concept of limited war. It's like, can you use enough of the material so you can justify contracts in the future? Fulfill the contracts now and justify the contracts into the future. And one of the ways to do that from an optics standpoint is you fund radical militant groups of these various organizations, look and give a sort of precedent or use them as a way to form a precedent in order to go into those, or a casus belli might be a better word here, to go to war, or to have, you know, various countries go to war, at least for a limited time, because we now possess weapons that can transcend war itself and knock us back into the Stone Age if we're not careful. So we have to make sure we have a sort of contrived war, limited war, contrived war, regional sort of skirmish type wars, that sort of thing. And that keeps the dollars flowing, and it keeps the world moving forward without complete annihilation and destruction. That's Kissinger's idea, by the way.
Yeah, so this puts everyone in a vortex. So, you know, it's spiraling now completely inward, but completely out of control.
Yeah.
Because, so where does it start? What's that country? The UK hands over $2.5 billion in aid or credit to bolster the Ukrainian Navy. And then Russia goes, well, they just bolstered their Navy with all this money, and they just received all these missiles, so we have to produce more. And then you have Turkey over there. They have an enormous army. Turkey goes, okay, well, I have to buy more. I have to make more. And then NATO says, well, if they're doing it, I'm doing it. And then you keep adding and you add.
That's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Exactly. And who's making all the money here? It's Raytheon, it's Northrop Grumman, it's Lockheed Martin. You and I are not doing anything.
No.
They're making all the money and the contracts. So
it also sets up a situation,
it's an endless cycle,
where it forces, to some degree, Russia to consider a loose treaty with China, which sets up the potential scenario for, although I don't believe it would go this far, because I don't think they want it to necessarily go this far, you know, some sort of world war, like some sort of larger conflict than something they maybe would want outside of what they would want, I would say, which makes it all even much more both interesting and terrifying at the same time, because Russia and China don't actually have as much aligned in what they want. But this sort of forces them to at least see eye to eye if we continue to engage in these belligerent activities, essentially for profit. But you're right. I mean, the ones that are winning the most are the military industrial complex that they have a product, they have to sell that product, and they only produce certain types of products. And if those products aren't used, then there's not going to be a market anymore for said products. And so the only one that wins in this case with the ramping up of military action, it's the military industrial complex combined with the banking cartels, the central banks of the world, that then loan to those national governments enormous sums of money in order to bolster their armaments, right? So
yeah, so they keep turning up the heat under that pot, and it keeps boiling and boiling, and then we'll see where it goes.
They better be careful.
Of course, but in the meantime, the ID 2020 stuff is not going away either. So don't lose focus, right?
Speaking of that, let me get this on the record and then we'll wrap up. This comes from James Jordan, by the way, who was on last week's roundtable. And let me see if I can find this, because he pointed this out. Vaccine, this is interesting. I was not aware of this, but I think we need to at least get this on the record. The vaccine passport scheme goes national, one QR code at a time. If the part that whether they realize it or not, so let me just search this. Okay. An NBC News story provides further detail about U.S. adoption of the Smart Health Card. Whether they realize it or not, let me make this big for people. About 200 million people in the United States now likely have access to a COVID-19 digital vaccine card. The digital pass, known as SMART, S-M-A-R-T acronym, health card, is voluntary and minimal by design to protect personal information. It has a person's name, date of birth, and the dates and brands of vaccination doses, all contained within a type of scannable barcode known as a QR code. And after a relatively quiet start, it has built momentum in recent months as more states and companies have signed on, making it something of a de facto national digital vaccine card. Quote, the beautiful thing about this is that this multi-state coalition is a coalition of the willing, end quote, said Dr. Brian Anderson, chief digital health physician at MITRE, M-I-T-R-E, a research nonprofit and architect of the health cards. Any such cards seemed like a remote possibility a year ago. When people first began receiving paper cards as proof of their COVID vaccinations, the Biden administration said in March that it would not take the lead on any national health pass, and instead defer to the private sector. And the idea of a vaccine, quote unquote, passport has faced opposition and even bans, especially in the Republican-led states such as Alabama, or in Republican-led states such as Alabama and Texas. Rather than a single app, the Smart Health Card is open source computer code that anyone can use to ping a verified source of health data and produce the unique QR code. The digital cards are now widely available from more than 400 sources, including states, pharmacies, and healthcare organizations, emphasis added. So this is already available. People aren't even aware that they already have them. If you've been vaccinated, you're already on a database, and we already know that their congressmen have started or passed some bill, I believe, that are collecting data, building a database of those who have not been vaccinated. So they'll make sure they have tags on both of us, if you will. But they already have this available. This smart card system is available if you want to go and get it and have it available to make it easier in the states by which you have to use identification in order to enter certain premises. And I think it's that's, to me, so much focus on the middle. And I actually agree with Tucker's had a number of really good monologues recently about this Ukraine, because it's like, how does it benefit the U.S. to focus on this? And then to get involved in this. And I agree with this. Like, this is not something this to me is a massive red herring. Not that it isn't very important for the reasons we outlined, and especially knowing who's profiting from it and why they would foment this sort of belligerent activity in this area. But to me, it's like the Biden administration has such bad optics surrounding it right now. They'll do anything to have some sort of misdirection, to use a diversionary tactic, if you will, to take our eyes off what's going on at home and look at abroad. And I think it's a desperate act, I think, if anything. It seems very desperate and very contrived, especially with that Bloomberg. It was a Bloomberg article, I believe they quoted in there.
Bloomberg imploded with excitement. They couldn't wait.
They're trying to really foment conflicts, and to me, it's just they're doing so in order to take away what's really, at least I deduce that they're doing so in order to take away our eyes from what's happening domestically, with COVID-19, with rising inflation, with supply chain issues, with so many different problems, masks in school. I mean, God, we could just go on and on, and all the stuff we cover on the show every single Sunday. They want to divert our attention away from him because he has one of the lowest ratings, of any president in American history. 70% of people recently stated, and I'll get this on the show card at the end of the night, that a poll came out talking about that 70% of people, Republican or Democrat, are over COVID. They just want to move on with their lives. They're over the narratives associated with COVID. Now we know about the issues surrounding polls, but if any of that's true, at least I would, that's a majority now. That's a majority of people are like, I just can't take it anymore. Like, well, I'm willing to live with the risk if it means just, getting back to some semblance of normalcy before like all of this transpired. And so they need to take our eyes away from this until they can maybe bring in something else to have us focus again on domestic policy, a new variant, a whole new pandemic. I think, I don't know. That's all speculation now, but I just wonder. I can't help but wonder.
They will come up with other things because right now they've got our attention and they do realize we're watching.
Yeah, they do.
So, I mean, I cannot peel myself from the news. And I don't watch CNN, Fox, what have you. That's not what I do. But I cannot stop looking at the news, and I don't find it, it's not exciting, but I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, I think we all are.
And that's how everybody is.
Yeah, that's why I participate on the show. Like, I was by myself in my own corner reviewing a lot of the same information that's presented on this show. And I finally came out of the woodwork, so to speak, because I think it's so important to keep up with the narratives that are percolating in the society right now, because I don't know what's coming next. And if we're not aware of it, we're not going to be able to plan accordingly. And we know about the Agenda 2021, but now Agenda 2030, they're trying to manifest a certain destiny that does not have a lot of us in that picture. And so we need to, I think, of more so than any time in human history, be aware of not only the domestic, but then the geopolitical landscape, because it's something that's going to affect us more and more, no matter how much we try to hide away from it. And that's why we do this show. And, for me, my love is lost. I keep trying to find a way to carve out a time to get back to my research where I am most interested in, which is ancient philosophy and the golden chain and the perennial tradition, all that stuff. But lately it's just been, I've been overwhelmed, obviously the rich away as well. And I can't thank you and Brad in the roundtable we had last week enough for helping provide a dialectic around these very complex situations and ideas that we're trying to present, because it's, but at the same time, I'm not finding time to really, and I don't know if I will, because we have to pay attention to what's going on. They're forcing us to pay attention.
And that's how I feel, because I can't take my eyes off of it, or I'm going to get swindled into something. You never know.
That's
so instead of doing what we were destined to do, like what you're doing is sort of what I'm doing, what I used to do as well.
That's how we formed a friendship in the background.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm studying philosophy as well, and I'm trying to write this book that's never going to come to fruition. But instead, we're unwilling participants in Pandora's unboxing video on YouTube. Like every day, it's a new evil that's coming out, and it's like, okay, Pandora, can we please shut off that box for 5 minutes?
Well said. In fact, is that that 2021 Pandora's unboxing 2021?
Yeah.
Or the video? Is there a video about it, or is it just like a reference, a loose analogy you're making?
No, I just feel that way.
Yeah, I got you. I thought
there's no video. This is what we're living through.
It is the video. It's a metaphor.
It's Pandora's unboxing the video we are living in.
We're living in that simulation of Pandora's box being opened and the chaos inside being unleashed on the population.
I mean, what's next? Smallpox? Cowpox?
Right. Horsepox, what they talked about in that Senate document going back to 2018 or 17. I had that actually in the show last week. I should bring that back up, but I'll do that later. And and that's an incredible point. I think if more so than history, any other time in history, now hope for the best, but truly, I think, we've been saying that for quite a bit on the show, prepare for the worst. I see a lot of alternative news networks, just be prepared for, grid shutdowns. We already see the supply chain issues. We already see issues in regards to inflation. We're trying to give people the relevant information they'll need to be able to make informed choices as to how they'll prepare and move forward in life, knowing that we're in a different landscape, we're in a different narrative, quote unquote, in regards to how they want to lead us into the future. And when I say they, the World Economic Forum and these supranational organizations, the UN, the Council on Foreign Relations, using these complexes, military, media, medical, big tech as well, and trying to use China as its filtering, the one to bring it into fruition, the one to manifest the sort of ideations of these complexes, these roundtable groups and these multinational corporations, and use that as a model that they can then foist onto the entire world. And that's in this total top-down dictator technocratic control grid system that they're trying to bring in. It's all connected. It's all interconnected. When you brought up, we're focusing on the Ukraine, but then there's the digital ID, and then we still have the vaccine, and then we still have this, the digital currency. We haven't talked about digital currencies and the fact that the central banks really want to roll out, while at the same time getting national governments to constrict the use of Bitcoin and Ethereum and these other coins, while they try to then roll out their own central bank digital currencies, CBDC. there's a lot going on. And it's all going to come. There's a quickening, Art Bell style, wink, wink, where there's like, it's going to go faster and faster and faster, I fear, as the years continue forward. And so I think we need to be even more conscious and conscientious of the fact that this isn't going to stop anytime soon. I use the analogy oftentimes in the town hall of a freight train out of control. We're heading for a cliff. The conductor sees the cliff and he's shoveling more coal into the engine. And so at this point, we have to find a way to be able to jump off that train without breaking too many bones or snapping our neck so we can find a way to live and move forward in this.
But at the same time, we need to always remember that this is not the worst time in history.
No.
There's no such thing, because this isn't a linear progression.
Mm-mm.
This has been going on because everything's cyclical, right? The universe is cyclical.
Right?
Yeah, Earth is cyclical. The solar system is cyclical. So and time is cyclical. So this is not the worst time ever. There's no such thing. So there's no reason to go into this black pill place where, oh my God, this is the worst time on the planet. Why did I come to Earth at this time? Well, you could have been living in 1940s London, and you could be, getting bombed on your head, or 2014 Syria, same thing could be happening to you.
Been part of the population in Baghdad when the Khanate moved in.
Exactly. So
bad news there. So.
We do what you can do to keep yourself sane and safe, but not COVID safe. I don't care what you do with COVID.
Because sane is the most important thing, because the black pill represents a sort of capitulation to the oppressive nature of what we're experiencing now. I feel like it's a capitulation, and we have to find a way to maintain a sense of strength and mental sort of mettle or fortitude and courageousness to be able to stand up to it in our own right. Even if that doesn't always mean doing a podcast and speaking out, it just means standing tall to the convictions and principles you have, such as maybe you don't want to get a vaccine, maybe you don't want to take a certain therapeutic, maybe you're ostracized and fine. Stand up for those principles. That's why I wish Rogan earlier on would have stood up for the principle of the fact that he didn't, in context, if you put those clips in context, do anything truly wrong. And I think it seemed very desperate in the way he very quickly reacted. And I can understand. I can only imagine the pressure he is feeling and the amount of attention he's garnered from people in his own inner circle, which is a lot of people. And that's not talking about the fallout we'll get tomorrow on the Monday news cycle in regards to all the commentary will be directed at what happened there. So yeah, we have to find a way to maintain some sanity and not fall into the black pill mentality. 1 billion% agree with that.